So big welcome to this discussion of the assignments today. And then we have the remainder of today and the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, to work on the assignments. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we will look at the remaining books of the Pentateuch. And then you'll have another 2 weeks after that to work on your assignments. For the grades, if you complete the assignments and do reasonably well and include some scholarly references, you'll get a pass. If you work more deeply and further on the questions and include more scholarly references, then you'll get a higher grade, such as a credit or a distinction or a high distinction if you do very well. Your first assignment to work on is to choose 2 books to write 1-page review on each. So you need to read some of the books. You don't need to read all of the books. You could read 3 or 4 or 5 pages or more, and then you need to write 1 page about the books that you're reading on the Pentateuch. So step 1, begin by reading the book and write a summary. Think about who the author is. Step 2, rewrite some of this material in your own words. You may even want to gather more scholarly references using Google Scholar, and you could find other resources that have written about the book you're looking at. Step 3, edit and rewrite the work so that it has higher quality. Step 4, make sure you add references, and you could use Google Scholar to find these references. Google Scholar is particularly useful in that it often gives the references in scholarly form. So if you go to Google and then put in Google Scholar, and then when you put in Google Scholar, you'll see that when you put in, say, Pentateuch, and then put in the book that you're looking at, you'll find that there'll be some excellent references and resources for you on this. So let's type in Google Scholar, and then into Google Scholar we could put Pentateuch, and we would find some resources on the Pentateuch, and we'd be able to use those in your assignments. So we have Davies' Introduction to the Pentateuch, so you could write your resource on that. We have Sailhammer's book on the Pentateuch, and I'm suggesting this could be one of the resources that's very valuable and useful for you. And you could read some of the pages on Sailhammer's book, and you could write about that. As well as that, you could, in fact, do a search on Sailhammer's book and find out even more. You can also get a nice copy of the reference here by clicking on Cite, C-I-T-E, and then copying the reference, and you could post that into the work that you are doing. And so very easy to Control-C, copy, Control-V, paste a copy of the reference for this resource. If you put Sailhammer's book into Google Scholar, then you'll be able to find more resources on Sailhammer's book. And I'm suggesting that would be a good resource for you to use and to begin with. So Sailhammer's book, we've got Google Scholar, and we've got other people who've written about this. Yes?
Sir,
There we go.
someone is waiting there. Will you let that person in?
Yes, thank you. I will do that. Thank you. Because we might want to get a bit more about Sailhammer, we could put the meaning of the Pentateuch, we could shorten it down, and we could see if that brings us more resources on it, and click on all resources. And we've got this person has written a discussion of it. And so we could go to that. And this shows you someone else's resource that they've written on Sailhammer's material. So you could find it very useful to go to these other resources about Sailhamer's writing there, which is very useful. So that's Sailhamer's writing on the Pentateuch. You could also take the title and the name and just put it into Google, and you may find others that have written on Sailhamer's book, and there's some discussion there. And you could also find, if you type in review, that there could be review of Sailhammer. You may find someone has written a review of that. And here is one copy that I have found, review of Sailhammer's book. If I open that up, I would find that I could use that in the assignment. And so this is quite a good review. This is almost an example of what a person would write. So this is a useful example. You begin by writing about the author. John Sailhammer is an evangelical Old Testament professor at Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary, California, and you write a little bit about the author. And then you talk about the perspective, and they're saying evangelical conservative perspective. And he is convinced that the Pentateuch is composed in its present state to present theological truth revealed from God. Of course, you need to rewrite this in your own words before you submit it. The book is divided into 3 parts, and you can see an example of how to write this review. And then Sailhammer proposes an understanding of the Pentateuch in which the connection between Moses and the writing is assumed. So that's one book that you could write about in your assignment. Another book, if you don't want to write about that or as well as that, because you need to write about 2, would be Thomas Constable's commentaries. So you could go to Sonic Light and write about Thomas Constable's online resources. Another resource you could look at is T.D. Alexander's Paradise to Promised Land. So that's quite useful. And I have emailed to you some resources on that. Another resource is Mark Strauss's Guide to Bible Study Methods, which we looked at in lesson 1. And then there are other resources that you could find from Google Scholar. Are there any questions about assignment 1, where you need to write a 1-page review on 2 books on the Pentateuch? Sush, do you have any questions, or does anyone else have questions on assignment 1?
As you have told, sir, we'll try to write it, and if we will have any question, then we will ask you during assignment also, sir.
Sush, could you just take 1 minute to tell everyone else in Nepali what is required for assignment 1, please?
हुन्छ, यहाँ चाहिँ 1 देखि 3 पेजसम्म चाहिँ हामीले पेन्टाटुकको पुस्तकको बारेमा हामीले लेख्नुपर्छ भन्दै हुन्छ। यहाँ चाहिँ 600 देखि 1000 वर्डसम्म चाहिँ हामीले लेख्नुपर्ने भयो। अनि त्यसमा चाहिँ अब 2 जना मेजर राइटरको त्यो बुकहरू चाहिँ हामीले पेन्टाटुकको बुकहरू हेरेर चाहिँ लेख्नुपर्छ भन्ने चाहिँ उहाँले हामीले भन्दै हुनुहुन्छ। यो चाहिँ अब रिक्वायरमेन्ट हो। त्यसपछि त्यही हो, सालहेमर भन्नेको बुक पनि हामीले हेर्न सक्छौँ। अनि बुक चाहिँ यहाँनिर गुगल स्कलर भन्ने छ, गुगलमा गएर चाहिँ त्यहाँनिर मलाई युनिभर्सले प्रश्न गर्दैछ। बुक चाहिँ गुगलमा जाने, त्यसपछि गुगल स्कलर लेख्ने, त्यसपछि हामीले त्यो लेखेपछि अथवा जे पनि सर्च गरेपछि हामीलाई सबैको रिसोर्सहरू मिल्छ। हामीले त्यहाँबाटै हेर्न सकिन्छ है त ओके सर डन
Thank you. That is very helpful. Very, very helpful. Thank you. Then for assignment 2, you're asked to write a brief annotated biography on at least 3 scholarly articles relating to the Pentateuch. So an annotated biography is a short paragraph, and then you're asked to do 3 of these short paragraphs. It is particularly helpful if you can include some references. If you want to get higher marks, you should evaluate the resource. How good is it? And why is it good? And you could write, it is good because. You could also evaluate it by saying there are some weaknesses. It is not so good because. And you could also summarize the resource. So that is assignment 2, why the resource is good, why the resource is not so good, and how you would evaluate it. Let's, for example, take some resources on the Pentateuch. If we put into Google Scholar, again, resources on the Pentateuch, we could just look at these resources on the Pentateuch, and then we could evaluate how good the resources are. So I type in the word Pentateuch, I do a search, and then I choose 3 of these, and you need to write a paragraph on these. This then provides the foundation for the rest of the work that you do. 2 books and 3 articles. So we have one article here on the composition of the Pentateuch, and this will also help you for your later assignment on the 2 views on the composition. One is that Moses writes, and then the other is that others edit it after Moses. We have another article here by T.B. Dozeman on the Pentateuch, which writes about, again, who wrote it. Now, if you take this article, Control C, so we go to
Excuse
site.
me, sir. Babda is waiting.
Thank you. I have clicked the button and let him in. Thank you. Much appreciated. So we type in Pentateuch into Google Scholar. It brings up an article like this one here by T.B. Dozeman on the Pentateuch. If we click on CITE site, it brings up the scholarly reference. Control C will copy that scholarly reference, and we can then bring it over into our discussion. We can go to the scholarly reference and look at it and examine it. We need 3 of these. There's a book here on JEDP. We have another discussion of Genesis. That is all very useful. It is also useful to put in other words as well as Pentateuch, such as pastoral care and mission. And so if we put in pastoral care and mission, we could find other resources on the Pentateuch. There's one here on the Holy Spirit in the Pentateuch, which I think could be very useful. It is by Andrews University, which means it is Seventh-day Adventist, but it can still be very useful. So we look up these resources and we use these resources. You need 3 of those. So working with 3 of those resources. And this is called an annotated bibliography, where you write a short 1 paragraph, a third of a page there. So your first assignment is to choose 1 book and then another book. And I have emailed you copies of some examples of books you could choose for your first assignment. Your second assignment, you're to use Google Scholar to find 3 scholarly articles. And then we have the third assignment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but it asks you to prepare 1 page, a handout that you could email to me and I could share it with the other students, or you could share it with the other students. And this encourages you to develop skills in preparing a handout for other people in your church or youth or young people or children that you're working with. Assignment 4 is the major assignment that you are working on, and you could begin this today if you have time, or over the next 3 days if you have time. And this is the exam that we do with 6 questions, and they're worth 10 marks each. Each assignment is worth 10 marks, but this one has 6 parts, so it's worth 6 lots of 10 marks. The first question is on methodology for study, and you're asked to prepare 1 or more pages in which you look at the methodology for the study of the Pentateuch. And we spoke about that on the first day. And so if you look at the notes from the first day, then you would find there are resources there. If we put into Google Scholar methodology for the study of the Pentateuch, then you may find some resources on that. If you put in methodology for the study of the Old Testament, you may find resources as well. And if you put in methodology and hermeneutics for the study of the Old Testament into Google Scholar, then you would find some resources there. So methodology and hermeneutics is for study of how we interpret the Old Testament. And you've got some very good resources that we could use. I quite like this one. This one looks very good. And you could make a copy of the resource. So CITE gives us a copy of the resource. So we could Control C, we make a copy of that, and we have a copy of this resource on methods used to study the Old Testament. So this is the first take-home exam question. What methods do we use to study the Old Testament? And so here we've got some, it's not in English. Unfortunately, I don't think it's in Nepali either. So that's let me down a little bit there. This is in English. That's very difficult. So we're looking for methodologies that we would use. You could possibly use Google. The danger is that Google won't be as good as Google Scholar. So for your first question, there could be some other resources in Google, not quite as good as Google Scholar, but there are some nice resources that you could use there. And if you've studied the subject of hermeneutics or Bible interpretation, you could use that in question 1. So that's the first question in your take-home exam. Question 2 looks at authorship of the Pentateuch and the 2 views. And the easiest way to answer this is to say that there is reason to believe Moses wrote much of the Pentateuch, and then scholars also say that editing has taken place, and JEDP describes the editing. If you want to find out more about JEDP, if you put that into Google Scholar, then that will give you further resources on J, the Yahwehist, E, Elohist, and D, Deuteronomist, and P, the priestly. And notes have been sent out to you on that, and it lists here the JEDP theory, and there is much on that. So that's JEDP theory, and JEDP theory includes J, which is the Jehovahist or Yahwehist, and E, which is the Elohist, using the word Elohim, And P is for the priestly, and D is for Deuteronomy. And so that's what you're asked to do in that question. So J is because some paragraphs in the 5 books have an emphasis on God as Jehovah, as Lord, and they have a view of God in which God is understood as caring and kind, and whereas E, the Elohim, Elohist, has a slightly different view of God, still caring and kindly, but slightly written in different ways. P has an emphasis on we need to come to God in a priestly way in the tabernacle, and so it's likely to be edited and written by a priestly person, whereas Deuteronomy is written by a person who is thinking more about the laws of God and what they mean, and they have thought even more deeply about these laws, and they have been written up in this way in Deuteronomy. So that's important, as well as Moses as an example for us and a leader for us. So that's question 2. Sush, can you just outline what students are being asked to do in the take-home exam of 60 questions? 6 questions, 60 marks, and question 1 and 2. Question 1, methodology. Question 2, authorship. Sush, can you outline that in Nepali for the students, please? So over to Sush. Thank you, Sush.
ओके सर यो चाहिँ सबै अब हामीले यो पहिला हामीले के अरे थियोलोजीमा गरे जस्तै गर्नुपर्ने रहेछ अनि यसमा चाहिँ अब फुटनोट लाउने त्यसपछि आउटलाइनहरू बनाउने कभर पेज पनि सायद चाहिन्छ होला अनि त्यसपछि अब हाम्रो त्यसमा अब हामीले कतिको राम्रोसँग लेख्छौँ हाम्रो क्वालिटी राइटिङको कुरा पनि आउँछ त्यसमा चाहिँ अब सबै कन्टेक्स्चुअल हिस्टोरिकलदेखि लिएर सबै कुराहरू पनि लेख्नुपर्ने रहेछ अनि यो जेइडिपी भन्ने थ्योरीलाई पनि प्रयोग गर्नुपर्ने रहेछ भन्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ यसो बुझ्यो है
सुन न
ए-
सर
अँ,
यो सरले यहाँ जेइडिपी भन्नुभएको छ जे भनेको जियोबिस्ट भनेर भन्नुभएको छ अनि एरोइस्ट प्रिस्टली र इकोनोमी भन्नुभएको छ नि त
अँ,
अनि त्यसपछि अब जियोको अब जेबाट लेख्दै गर्दाखेरि जेको भ्यू अनुसार लेख्ने अथवा जेसँग रिलेटेड कुरा अनुसार लेख्ने हो
यो चाहिँ यस्तो मैले बुझे अनुसार चाहिँ यो जेइडिपी भनेको चाहिँ फुल्ली यो जेइडिपी थ्योरी नै हो तिमीले तिमीले के अरे उमा एकचोटि अनलाइनमा एकचोटि गएर हेर जेइडिपी के हो भनेर ठ्याक्कै यसको तिमीलाई आउँछ अनि
मैले
तिमीले
अलिक बुझेन हौ के भन्नु भएको
हाँ
मैले अलिक बुझेन के दाजु के भन्नु भएको
अलिक ठुलो सोले बोल्नु न केही सुन्दैन हौ
ए हो र
सुनेर मैले त
र
पुरै
मिस
सुनिरहेको छ
ल ठिक छ ठिक छ ठिक छ
Sush, what is the concerns that are being raised by Inosh?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, they are still having confusion on JDP theory. So can you please elaborate something about that?
लेख्यो होला
That's a good question. So we know that Moses wrote the initial what we have in the books. So Moses writes, particularly Exodus, because Exodus is his story. And so this is Moses' story. That is, he leaves Egypt, leads the people towards the promised land. Now, he may not have written it all. He may have assistants who wrote it. And so we have the possibility that there are assistants who write it as well as Moses. But the emphasis is on Moses as the writer. We also have other material on Abraham, which is the Genesis material. Again, Moses may have gathered this Genesis material while he was in Egypt, or he may have gathered the Genesis material from other Hebrew people, including the material about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Then we have the other books, which include Leviticus, which is priestly. So Leviticus is more the priestly material. And then there is Deuteronomy, which goes further into the laws. So Deuteronomy. In Exodus, which is the Moses material, we have a little bit about the law, particularly in Exodus 20 and 21 and 22. And then we have a little bit about the tabernacle and the priestly material in Exodus 23 through to 40. So that material may have been placed in the Leviticus priestly material, and the law material may have been developed in the Deuteronomy material. However, this was written, if it was written by Moses, was written in 400 BC. We don't have the writings of 400 BC. We have the writings of around about 400 BC, which is 1,000 years later. And we can read those writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so in 1947, when the caves of the Dead Sea were explored, they found copies of these books, which date back to 100 BC, 200 BC, maybe even 400 BC. And these are written in classical Hebrew language, which is different to the Hebrew language of Moses' time, which is very ancient Hebrew language. And so there's even some translation that's taken place and some addition. And so these writings then from 1400 BC, around about 900 BC, scholars working in Solomon's Jerusalem and Solomon's temple would have rewritten these writings, and they would have added and developed and written more and edited these writings. And then scholars who were writing after the attack of the Assyrians in 722 BC, there is the attack by Assyria. And so scholars would then have rewritten, added, written, and edited to these writings. And so we then have more changes and developments. And then around about 586, the Assyrians take captive. So the Assyrians take captive 10 or 11 tribes, and the only tribe who is left is the tribe of Judah. But in 586 BC, the Babylonians take Judah captive. And so even Babylonians disappear. Babylonians take Judah captive, and even Judah disappears because it's taken captive by the Babylonians. But in 400 BC, then under the Persians, Judah can return to Jerusalem and Israel. And this is called the Second Temple period because they rebuild there. So sometime between the time of Moses and between the copy of the Old Testament that we have in that 1,000 years, changes have been made, and new editors and writers have given us the copy that we have. And the people who use the word Jehovah for God, they are called the Jehovah's. So that's J. Jehovah is the name for God. God is Lord, sovereign over all. Other names used for God include the name Elohim. And this also means God, but perhaps God is more caring and kindly. Others have written more priestly material, and so that is P, and others have written more legalistic material, and that is D. So it's possible to try and identify the J material, the E material, the P material, and the D material. However, if you go and look in Google Scholar on the JEDP theory, so JEDP theory, and if you go to Google and Google Scholar, you'll find that it's even more complex because there could be more people who have edited and written besides JEDP. So there is much written on JEDP, but there are other writers as well. And some people like JEDP, others don't like it. They prefer Moses, and then others feel that there are so many writers that JEDP is really not going to be adequate as well. So, Sush, can you briefly summarize some of those things that I have said about JEDP? So over to Sush for a brief summary of what Dr. Sam has said describing JEDP. Sush.
ओके जेटिपी थ्योरी भनेको चाहिँ अब ठ्याक्कै चाहिँ अब 5वटा पेन्टाटुक भने जस्तै बाइबलको जेनेसिस, एक्सोडस, लेभिटिकस, नम्बर्स एन्ड ड्युटोनोमी भन्ने बुकलाई चाहिँ यो चाहिँ सबै चाहिँ मुसाले लेखेको होइन भनेर भन्ने पनि रहेछ। अनि जो चाहिँ 1400 BC-मा मर्यो। तर धेरै अथरहरूले चाहिँ अब यो थ्योरी चाहिँ यो वास्तवमा यो पुस्तक पनि धेरै परमेश्वरको हरेक नामहरूद्वारा चाहिँ लेखिएको छ। अनि यो चाहिँ अब हरेक यो चाहिँ यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ यो सबै पिसहरू अथवा यो पेन्टाटुकको सबै भागहरू चाहिँ छ। अनि त्यसमा अब यसको लेख्ने स्टाइलहरू अनि अब विशेष गरी यो चाहिँ यो जेइडिपी थ्योरी चाहिँ 4वटा सपोज अथरहरूसँग चाहिँ यो हुन्छ है त। एउटा चाहिँ जौइस्ट भन्छ, एउटा यौइस्ट, जसलाई चाहिँ यहोवा भनेर पनि भन्छ परमेश्वरको नाम। अनि दोस्रो चाहिँ इलोहिस्ट, अनि त्यो चाहिँ त्यसलाई चाहिँ हामी एलोहिम भनेर भन्छौँ, त्यो पनि परमेश्वरको नामै हो। अनि तेस्रो चाहिँ ड्युटोनोमिस्ट भन्छ, त्यो चाहिँ व्यवस्थाको पुस्तकको लेखक भनेर भन्छ। अनि त्यसपछि प्रिस्टली अथर अफ लेभिटिकस पनि भन्छ। त्यसलाई चाहिँ अब यसलाई चाहिँ ठ्याक्कै यो कुराहरूलाई चाहिँ हामीले जेइडिपी थ्योरी भन्न सक्छौँ भन्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ रहेछ।
अनि सुन न साथी, सुन
हजुर
न, अब यो जेइडिपी थ्योरीको फर जेइडिपी थ्योरी भएर लेख्ने कि अगस्त जेइडिपी थ्योरी भएर लेख्ने मैले, अथवा के मेरो भ्यू लेख्ने हो कि के लेख्ने हो?
What's
Hello, sir.
Enosh's question, Sush?
Hello, sir.
What's Enosh's question?
Yeah, Enos is asking me for that. Is it okay to write in his own view, or he has to write based on JDP theory? So he's asking that, sir.
Yeah, that is a good question, Enosh. Do you write your own view, or do you write the scholar's view? I suggest that you write 3 things. I suggest that you write, firstly, what is called the conservative view. And the conservative view says Moses wrote most of this. So, or you could write Moses as author is important because, and Sailhammer is saying that. Even if Moses is not the only writer, seeing Moses as having a role is useful. Another reason, Enosh, is because literarily, in terms of literature, we place an emphasis on Moses, but this doesn't necessarily mean that Moses wrote it. So your first viewpoint is that of Moses being author. Secondly, I suggest that you write JEDP and you write the next section on those scholars who are JEDP scholars who are keen on this theory. And then thirdly, you can write your view. And that way you've covered all three perspectives, the conservative perspective, the JEDP perspective, and your view perspective. I guess you could even write, it is so complex, who knows? But probably you could say that it is complex and we do not need to make this decision because what is important is that God reveals. So what is important is that God revealed no matter which author God used. And so it could be God's revelation that is important, not so much whether it's Moses or Yahwehist or Elohist or Deuteronomist or priestly. Walter Brueggemann says that the Bible writers were keen to include different voices because this encourages us to think more. This encourages us to compare and consider different viewpoints. So instead of just having one viewpoint, if we have many viewpoints, it encourages us to think more, to be open to God more, to be more humble, and to look to God to guide us and lead us. So that's Walter Brueggemann's view, that there are many voices, different voices, because that is good for our development and growth. So thank you, Sush. That is very, very good. And thank you, Enosh, for those very good questions on question 2. If you still have difficulties or challenges with this, I suggest you write some. You could either email it to me and we can discuss this further next week on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday as well. In question 3, you're asked to look at Genesis and a major theme in Genesis. And I have given you some examples. So the first question could be, what is the major theme? And one is that it's not days being 24 hours, because interestingly, it says that a day equals the time of light. And that wouldn't be 24 hours, it could be 12 hours or so. But the time of light can be the time in which the light is turned on by God for doing the first task, which is making the world and those things in it. But the sun and moon are made on day 4. So that makes it slightly more complex. The other Genesis question you might want to look at, which I think is perhaps the most valuable, is Adam and Eve and sin and the fall, and then redemption and God's plan of redemption. Another question could be on Abraham. Another question could be on Joseph. So they're the Genesis questions. And then the next question after that is the Exodus questions. So you need to write 1 page or more on Exodus, and it could be on Moses, Exodus, or it could be on Passover, or it could be on calling. So if you wanted to choose calling on Exodus, you could go to Google Scholar and you could look up calling on Exodus in Google Scholar. So if we looked at Exodus, Moses, calling by God, and mission and other things like that, then you could find the call of Moses. And so that's one resource that you could use. And then we have another one here. So this emphasis on calling could be one theme that you could look at. Another one could be freedom, liberation, and you could write your question on freedom and liberation. So you need to choose an Exodus theme. Another one is build a sanctuary. And so you could choose as your theme for Exodus on the sanctuary, meeting place, and Google Scholar will give you some resources on the tabernacle meeting place. So they're the sort of questions that you choose for question 4. Certainly you would leave question 5 and 6 and those questions for next week. And I think you would leave the research paper for next week. Do we have any further questions? And so you choose one and you choose, if you have one resource, then you'll get a pass or a credit. But if you have more than one resource, you could get a higher mark. So for each of these, if you go to one resource in Google Scholar, then you would get a pass or a credit. But if you go to more resources in Google Scholar, then you may get a higher mark. Are there questions about the assignments and the take-home exam?
No any questions, sir. During our assignment, we will, I think, surely ask you for some.
Yeah. So for each one of those, you choose one task. And so, so question 1, back. So assignment 1, you just do one.
Sir, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Enes is asking about the book of Exodus. He's saying we have to choose 1 out of 4, something like that, sir, or what?
Yes, you choose one aspect of Exodus. So the first task was 2 books, the next task was those journal articles, and then we come to the exam. And so for the exam, you do 1 on methodology, and then you do 1 on JEDP and Moses, and then question 3, you do 1 on Genesis, question 4, just 1 on Exodus. So you just choose one theme in Exodus, which could be Passover. And so you could go to Google Scholar and you could look at Passover. So you could put Exodus and Passover, or you could put Exodus, Moses, Passover in Google Scholar, and that would give you some resources. You don't have to read all of the resource, but you could read a page or 2 from the resource, and then you could write about this is what Passover means in Exodus. And of course, it would be good to read the Exodus itself. And so if you go to Exodus chapter 12, you could read about the Passover when God passes over. So I think that would be good. You could quote the verses in Exodus 12 that describe the Passover. You could pray and read and pray and think about what's it mean when God passes over the people of Israel and no one dies at that time. And I think particularly challenging is that they sacrifice a lamb, and that reminds us that there is a cost when God passes over. And this could have been a disease that moved through and killed people, or it could be God's judgment. So there are different ways of understanding what took place. Yes. Further questions? The date of the submission, you have up to 2 weeks after the end of next week. You can send it to me earlier if you wish. So if you want to send me some of the questions, some of the assignments, then you could do that earlier, but it needs to be fully completed by 2 weeks after the end of next week. Any further questions? And you can type questions in the chat as well.
केही प्रश्नहरू छ हाम्रो फिबी, त्रिसाको, पावल, इस्माइल, बाबुदाई छ कि छैन बाबुदाई? केही छ प्रश्न फिबी?
So thank you each one. I look forward to meeting you again on Monday. We meet at 12 noon, not 9 a.m. on Monday. And I look forward to meeting then as we look at the next 3 books. And if you have any questions while doing the assignment, please send me an email and send an email to drsam.hay@gmail.com. Let me pray for you today as you head off to do work on your assignments. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you can work with each student, each person as they study now this material and they read for themselves, write for themselves, and think and wrestle with your revelation. Thank you, God, that you speak into our lives. Thank you that you give us skills to find resources such as we find at Google Scholar, such as we find at Google and online, such as we find in the books we're going to read and in the journal articles. We pray now that you will be with Dr. Sam, that you'll be with each student, Phoebe, Sush, Ismail, Enosh, Powell, and Tricia. Pray that you be with each one of us so that we would be open to you revealing your truths to us and training us and teaching us so that we can be more fully equipped for the tasks that you call us to. Amen. So thank you each one. I look forward to catching up with you on Monday
Thank you, sir.
and look forward to reading material. Thank you. See you
Okay,
then.
so have a nice weekend
Okay,
ahead.
sir. Thank you so much.
Privacy.
ओके सर बाय बाय
Bye-bye.